Welcome to the Daily Views on September 14th, 2021. Let's start in London in the UK. The UK economy got off to a weak start in the second half of the year. The gross domestic product, the GDP, rose in July by 0.1% compared to the previous month, as the Statistics Office ONS announced on Friday in London. The expectations of analysts were missed. They had expected an average growth of 0.5%. The growth was driven by industrial production, which increased by 1.2%. The construction sector, on the other hand, weighed on development, while the service sector stagnated. Overall economic output is still 2.1% below the level it had reached before the corona pandemic. The British economy is currently burdened by rising corona infections and a pronounced shortage of materials and labor force. The latter is also due to an indirect effect of the corona pandemic, as many employees have to go into quarantine due to contact with infected people. In addition, there is a high shortage of truck drivers, which is also seen as a consequence of Brexit. And now let's go to Tel Aviv in Israel. For the third time in a row, Israel's Air Force fired at targets in the Palestinian territory after a rocket attack from the Gaza Strip. On Monday night, another rocket was fired from the Gaza Strip into Israeli territory, said the Israeli army. In response, Israeli fighter jets attacked a military post owned by Hamas, which ruled the coastal strip, and a heavy machine gun that was fired in the direction of Israel. Israel sees the Islamist Hamas as responsible for all attacks from the Gaza Strip. The situation on the Gaza border had recently come to a head again, fueling concerns about a new, larger conflict. Violent demonstrations resulted in deaths and injuries, and in addition to rocket attacks, more and more balloons with incendiary devices and explosives are being sent from Gaza to Israeli territory. At the beginning of the month, Israel implemented a series of relief measures to calm the situation. However, the ruling Hamas in the Gaza Strip is calling for the blockade of the coastal strip, which has been tightened since 2007, and they call for it to be lifted completely. I have to put it that way. Israel's Foreign Minister Yair Lapid presented a plan for the development on the Gaza Strip on Sunday. This provides for economic development in return for calm, with the participation of Egypt and the Palestinian Authority. Around 2 million people live in very poor conditions in the Mediterranean region. Israel and Egypt justify the blockade with security considerations. Hamas is classified as a terrorist organization by Israel, the United States, and the European Union. In May, Israel engaged in an 11-day armed conflict with Palestinian militants in the Gaza Strip. Egypt eventually brokered a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas that went into effect on May 21st, and obviously now was broken by Hamas. But now let's go to Wiesbaden in Germany. The price increase in Germany remains high. In August, wholesale prices rose by 12.3% compared to the previous year, as the Federal Statistical Office announced on Monday in Wiesbaden. That was the strongest increase since October 1974. Oh, I was 2 months old then, when wholesale prices had risen a little more in the wake of the first oil crisis. In July 2021, the increase was 11.3%, and in June 10.7%. The statisticians cite two reasons for the high rise in prices at the wholesale level. On the one hand, the prices for many raw materials and intermediate products are currently rising sharply. These effects can be traced back to numerous delivery problems in world trade, most of which are related to the corona pandemic. On the other hand, the Federal Office refers to a statistical base effect due to the very low price level a year ago. This was a consequence of the severe economic corona slump in 2020. Wholesale is one of several levels in Germany on which the general price level is formed. Added to this are the prices for goods imported into Germany and the prices that manufacturers receive for their products. They all have an impact on consumer prices, which the European Central Bank, the ECB, uses to base its monetary policy. In Germany, consumer prices had recently risen more sharply than in almost 28 years. And now let's go to Seoul in South Korea. The self-proclaimed nuclear power North Korea has, according to its own statements, successfully tested novel cruise missiles with a long range. The Defense Science Academy carried out the tests over the weekend, the state media reported on Monday. It is a strategic weapon of great importance, they say. According to observers, North Korea indicated that the new guided missile also had the potential to carry nuclear warheads. South Korea initially did not confirm the tests of the neighboring country, which is largely isolated because of its nuclear weapons program. The South Korean General Staff announced that the information was currently being investigated in cooperation with the United States. United Nations resolutions prohibit North Korea from testing ballistic missiles, which, depending on their design, can also carry nuclear warheads. However, tests of cruise missiles are not subject to sanctions against the countries. Unlike ballistic missiles, cruise missiles have their own permanent propulsion. According to reports from North Korea, the new type was tested on Saturday and Sunday. The guided missiles flew 7,580 seconds, that's around 2 hours and 6 minutes, on an oval trajectory over the mainland and the waters in North Korea. They would have hit their targets 15,000 meters away. The type was created in 2 years of development work. Detailed tests of rocket parts, as large numbers of engine tests on the grounds, controls and steering tests were carried out successfully. The development was of strategic importance for the possession of another effective deterrent to guarantee the security of the state more reliably and to keep the military maneuvers of hostile forces against the People's Republic in check, the North said. Oh boy. Pyongyang accuses the United States in particular of having hostile policies. As was the case a few months earlier, the most recent North Korean weapons tests were carried out after a joint military exercise by the armed forces of the USA and South Korea. The joint command exercise, criticized by Pyongyang, ended after 9 days on August 26th. In March, North Korea had also launched cruise missiles after a similar commando exercise in South Korea. The negotiations between the USA and North Korea about its nuclear program have been stuck for a good 2.5 years. In February 2019, a summit meeting between former US President Donald Trump and North Korea's ruler Kim Jong-un in Vietnam failed. At a party congress earlier this year, Kim announced that his country would strengthen nuclear deterrence with new weapons, including new ICBMs, that's the ballistic missiles. And now let's go to Germany again, to Hanover. The Christian Democrats, the CDU, has remained the strongest force in Lower Saxony in the local elections in the independent cities and in the districts, as well as in the Hanover region, despite losses. According to the preliminary official result from Monday morning, it was 31.7% for the CDU, 30% for the SPD, the Socials, the Greens with 15.9%, the Liberals with 6.5%, the right-wing AfD with 4.6%, and the left with 2.8%. 2 weeks before the general election, it's important, almost 6.5 million people in Lower Saxony were able to vote on new members of the local parliaments. The CDU, the Christian Democrats, has been the strongest communal force in Lower Saxony for around 40 years. In the local elections 5 years ago, the CDU in the districts and urban districts won 34.3% of the vote and were still ahead of the SPD with 31.2%. The Greens had 10%. The AfD, they lost now, they had 8%. And it's still successful for them despite the polls. But now let's go to Oakland in the USA. The game company Epic Games takes the dispute over Apple's App Store to the nearest court. As announced, the makers of the online game Fortnite appealed the judgment of a California district judge who had largely dismissed their claims. Epic's justification for the objection was initially not apparent from the trial documents published on Sunday. Among other things, Epic wanted to enforce the right to its own App Store on the iPhone by lawsuit. Judge Yvonne Gonzalez Rogers did not follow the game company's argument. that Apple's approach of only allowing the app to be installed from its own download platform was anti-competitive. However, she saw unfair competition in the fact that Apple does not allow developers to refer users to opportunities to purchase digital items directly from them. That should change in 3 months. When purchasing digital articles and content via Apple's in-app system, developers have to cede 15 to 30% of the purchase price to the iPhone group. According to the judgment, around 70% of the App Store revenue comes from game apps. Epic and several other major app providers want to run their business on the iPhone by Apple without the App Store levy. Apple counters that the App Store system is designed to protect consumers from data thieves and fraudsters, and the levy is necessary, among other things, to finance this infrastructure. And I must say, I think that this infrastructure is good security-wise. Apple banned Epic from the App Store last year after the game company secretly smuggled into Fortnite the option of buying digital items directly. The judge saw Apple in the right because Epic had violated its contract with the iPhone company. And now we go to Germany one more time, to Frankfurt. The euro started the trading week with losses. In the morning, the common currency fell to $1.1790. That is the lowest level in about 2 weeks. The European Central Bank, the ECB, has set the reference rate on Friday at $1.1841. At the beginning of the week, there are no crucial economic data on the program that could cause stronger price movements on the foreign exchange market. There are, however, some high-ranking central bankers, including ECB President Christine Lagarde. The ECB decided last week to slow down the pace of its asset purchases a little. However, they did not want the move to be understood as a tightening of the monetary policy. And now we have to go to Niamey in Niger. In the West African country Niger, according to a report by Amnesty International, more and more children are victims of fatal attacks, violence, and forced recruitment by armed groups. According to a report published on Monday, the danger for boys and girls is particularly great at the borders with the neighboring states of Mali and Burkina Faso. In the Tillaberi region, armed groups have killed more than 60 children since January, according to the Human Rights Organization. And according to the report, girls are at risk of kidnapping or being forcibly married to fighters. Boys would be recruited and then trained with weapons. A number of armed groups are active in Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso, as well as in other countries in the Sahel region. Some have sworn allegiance to the Al-Qaeda terrorist network, the Boko Haram Islamists, or the Islamic State, the IS terrorist militia. The governments have little control outside of the cities, which is not only exploited by jihadist groups, but also by criminal networks such as people smugglers, so traffickers. And now we go to Tehran in Iran. The International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, is making a new attempt to move the stalled nuclear dispute with Iran. IAEA Chief Rafael Grossi arrived in Tehran on Saturday evening to meet with Iran's new nuclear chief Mohammad Eslami and probably with Foreign Minister Hussein Amirabdollahian. It is the IAEA chief's first visit to Tehran since President Ebrahim Raisi took office last month. Grossi wants to comment on the results after his return in Vienna. I haven't heard it yet, I'm sorry. The background to this is the dispute over Iran's nuclear program. The latest report by the IAEA, which the supervisory authority presented a few days ago, showed that Tehran had increased the amount of highly enriched uranium again. This means that Iran continues to clearly violate the requirements of the 2015 Vienna Atomic Energy Agreement, which was supposed to prevent it from building an atomic bomb. Tehran has always maintained that its nuclear program is only for civilian purposes. However, Iran recently confirmed its will to continue negotiations to revive the agreement in Vienna. A date for this was not given. Negotiations on bailing out the nuclear deal, which had been going on since April, were interrupted after the change of government in Iran. The remaining partners in the deal, China, Germany, France, the UK and Russia, are looking to get the US back on the deal. Trump cancelled that, if you remember. At the same time, Iran should also comply with its requirements again. And now, let's go to Cairo in Egypt. The Egyptian government has promised improvements to respect human rights in the North African country. At a ceremony in the new administrative capital east of Cairo on Saturday, they gave the go-ahead for National Strategy for Human Rights that is to run for 5 years. Egypt, under President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, has long been the subject of international criticism for massive violations of fundamental human rights. With the new strategy, among other things, the right to political participation, as well as the establishment of political parties and non-governmental organizations, should be guaranteed, said Egypt's representative to the United Nations in Geneva. Ahmed Ihab Gamal Eddin is his name. The government also wants to revise laws on freedom of expression. The strategy also continues the state's efforts to protect journalists and media workers, they said. Human rights organizations have long given the government a devastating testimony. Under al-Sisi, Egypt is experiencing the worst human rights crisis in decades, writes Human Rights Watch. Tens of thousands of government critics are in custody, including journalists. The government is taking a particularly hard hand against the Islamist Muslim Brotherhood. Freedom of the press and freedom of expression are massively curtailed. The government repeatedly justifies the measures with a fight against terror. And now, one more time, we have to go to London in the United Kingdom. More than 2 tons of cocaine worth almost 190 million euros have been seized off the coast of Great Britain. 6 men were arrested on board a luxury yacht around 80 miles from the southern English port of Plymouth, including a British and 5 men from Nicaragua, the NCA announced on Saturday. Officials from the Australian Federal Police and the Border Guards were also involved in the operation. The yacht, coming from the Caribbean, was brought ashore after the arrest on Thursday evening, where the large amount of drugs was found, and that's quite a lot, I must say. And now let's go to Beijing in China. German Chancellor Angela Merkel spoke with China's head of state and party Xi Jinping about the situation in Afghanistan. As the federal government announced, the two spoke on Friday during a phone call about the corona pandemic, bilateral relations, economic issues, international climate protection, and obviously other international topics. Xi Jinping also called US President Joe Biden, the White House announced on Friday. Against the background of the tensions between the rival great powers, the White House spoke of a broad strategic discussion. Both presidents had discussed areas where our interest collides, as they say, and areas where our interests, values, and perspectives diverge. Relations between the United States and China have fallen to a low point since diplomatic relations were established in 1979. And I know it was a quite long one, but a lot was going on today, so I had to make a longer video. And I hope I see you on my next news as well. But don't forget to go to my daily tea as well if you want some celebrity news. I'll see you in my next video. Bis gleich.